Good morning, everyone. We are continuing our Ananda way of life from the guidelines for Ananda, members of the Ananda Sevaka order, which is just all the everyday ways that you make self-realization an integral part of the way you live. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to know that you are always with us, guiding and blessing us. Give us the calmness, the clarity, and the courage to hear your inner voice, that we may live our lives as God intended, which was with ever-expanding consciousness, ever deeper compassion, ever more profound kindness. Help us always to serve Thee to the best of our ability, according to Thy will. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, friends. Yesterday we finished with home life, and we're going to start today on personal habits. But I was asked a question that I thought is relevant about the physical care of the body, and that is the degree to which we should use doctors in modern medicine. It's odd that the question would even come up in a certain sense, but yogis tend to want to be independent, and also we have a high regard for ancient wisdom and not necessarily a complete embracing of modern ways of doing things. But in the field of medicine, it's good to not only look to the theory of it, but to look at the example that the master set for us. As it happens, this same subject came up in a class I was giving last night based on letters Swami has written. There's a book called In Divine Friendship, and I'm doing a parallel series going through that book. And the question actually had nothing to do with health. It had to do with how do you know what's true? And the section of the book is about Christianity and yoga, so it was about how do you reconcile what people interpret to be the teachings of Jesus with what Master said, and on and on. Swami said, I look not only to what Master said, but also the example he set in his life. And Master said some, and therefore in the life that I've lived, I don't only listen to the words that anyone said, I actually look at Swami's life and try to understand how did he live, how did he act out the idea of being a good disciple. And I've on many occasions spoken to Swami about the fact that he does exemplify what he learned from his guru, because his only criteria for the way he behaves is what Master taught him, although he mentions two exceptions. Master did not recommend drinking coffee, and Swami drank coffee. He said that in that sense, he was not obedient to Master's suggestion, but he must have felt at peace with it because he did it. And the second one was Swami did not keep his room neat. Master had said, he trained the monks, the way to keep your room tidy is as soon as you're done using something, put it away completely. Swami said, quote, that takes too much time. At the end of Swami's life, he had housekeepers and personal assistants and people who kept his house exceedingly orderly and tidy, but left to his own devices, he was more on his own when I first met him. He just sort of basically left everything out, is the only way I can say it. In his mind, he was using it all the time, and he didn't lose things. He always knew where everything was, even letters he'd received weeks before. He always knew where they were, but they were at the bottom of the heap of the pile on his desk or behind the toaster or, next to the breakfast cereal. They could be anywhere. They weren't lost. They just weren't put away, because that's the way Swami lived with things. But having said that, his behavior reflected his guidance from Master and the example Master set. And in regard to modern medicine, Swami was aware both of its benefits and of its drawbacks. But he had both of his hips replaced. He actually had one of his hips replaced twice, because the prosthesis in some way became dislodged or something. So he had actually 3 hip operations, even though he has 2 hips. And he had a pacemaker. His life was saved multiple times by the intervention of modern medicine. By the end of his life, he was on a whole series of drugs, all of which prolonged his life by many, many years. And the hip replacements vastly increased the quality of his life. So even though we're not putting the body at the center of our sadhana, if we lose our body, we lose the opportunity for spiritual growth that it represents. And for most people, it takes us time to grow up, to become mature enough, to have the opportunity to find our spiritual path, to learn the techniques and the methods, to begin to practice them. So it's a good idea to keep the body going as long as you can, because unless we're going to be liberated, in which case you don't have to ask anybody any questions, we're going to have another body. And we're just going to have to be children and go through the whole thing again. When our friend Happy Winningham, she was a very early host for the AIDS virus. She became ill with it very early in that cycle of the epidemic. So she was going through things before they had worked out the medical response to it all that well. And the treatments that she was having to take, she told Swamiji, she said it's a bit like having the flu all the time. The effect of it, she said, and she'd had several death and return experiences and wasn't the slightest bit concerned about dying, just wanted to do the right thing spiritually. And she said to Swami, how long do I have to keep trying? When can I just let this body go? And his answer was, you should keep your body as long as you can make spiritual progress. He said, at the point in which the body becomes an insurmountable obstacle, perhaps because of unrelenting pain or just other dysfunctions, or the medical care itself becomes the center of your life rather than it supporting the life that you really want to lead. I'm not talking about medically assisted suicide. I'm definitely not talking about that. But I'm just talking about how long does she keep taking treatments. I know people with cancer have to face the same issue. They can keep your body alive, but at what point is it simply not worth it? As long as you can use that body to make spiritual progress, Swami said, you should try to stay in it. Because otherwise you just have to be born as a baby. You have to learn to walk. You have to learn to feed yourself with a spoon. You have to learn to read. Then you have to find your way through all the chaos of adolescence. I mean, why bother if you can just make more progress right now? But at a certain point, it's just, you just let it be. Swamiji had his nurse, Miriam. She's written a book, by the way. I think she just calls it Swamiji. She's written a book about her experiences, which is very wonderful to read. Narayani also wrote a book called My Heart Remembers Swami Kriyananda. Both of them are wonderful first-hand accounts of life with Swami. Dayanand has written a book also, and there's, of course, Devi wrote a biography many years ago. Anyway, any first-hand account you can get, I highly recommend. Vijay wrote one. But Miriam talked about, Swami gave Miriam the final decision on his medical care. And he let us all know that we should all defer to her. She let us all know that she was going to consult us and expected us to support her. But at one point, Swami's kidneys really just collapsed on him. And he was in India, and he was in the hospital, and it was a real decision time. And Miriam said to him, and Swami was barely conscious, and his voice was very weak, and it was a very difficult moment. She said, Swamiji, this may be the point. She said, I can just take you home, make you comfortable, and you can leave your body at home. If we stay in the hospital, they're going to have to do dialysis. You'll probably recover, but we don't know. And she felt like she was standing at that line when it was enough. And she said Swami suddenly became very strong, and his voice was very strong. And he said, no, I have more to do. We should continue to treat my body. So they did. The dialysis turned out to be temporary, and he did recover, and he went on for a number of more years and did a number of things that were very important for a master's work. So he was there making that decision. I thought it was an important adjunct to the whole question of caring for the body, because I'm surprised sometimes by the forceful dogmatism of people's positions. The mind is the healer, and it becomes an either-or proposition instead of a nuanced one. I'll tell you one more story about Swamiji and medical care, which I wrote up in Swami Kriyananda as we have known him, but let me think what the issue was. What was the cause of it? I think it might have been that Swami had pulled a muscle in his groin or something like that. He was in very bad pain. I can't even recall completely. And there were about 4 of us at his house at Ananda village. I was there, and Jyotish and Devi were there, and maybe 1 or 2 others, but I don't recall. I don't know if his nurse, Miriam, was present or not. And Swami was in intense pain and debilitated in countless ways, and he absolutely refused to let us call the doctor. We were at Ananda village. Dr. Peter, his primary physician, was just, a half a kilometer away, and Swami would not let us call the doctor. Do not call the doctor. So for an hour or an hour and a half, we tried to make him comfortable. He tried to distract himself from what he was feeling, but it was just overwhelming. And finally, Devi just simply couldn't stand it, and she just walked over and called Dr. Peter, and Dr. Peter came. But what was so interesting about that was, as soon as Devi just took matters in her own hands, and as soon as Dr. Peter was there, Swami completely surrendered. He just completely surrendered to whatever Dr. Peter wanted. He was not resentful that the call had been made. He didn't reprimand Devi for doing what she felt was right. He was very respectful to Dr. Peter. As I reflected on it later, during that whole period of time, I believe it was during the years of litigation, but it was during the period of time when Swami was using his body to work out the karma of many of us, and also the karma of the conflict that we were in over Master's work. I mean, I said that directly. You're using your body to work out all this karma, aren't you? He said, yes, just like that. Yes, of course, that's what I'm doing. I might not have put that in the book because when Swami was living, he didn't want me to say that. After he passed, I felt I was free to say it. He felt like it was a very private sacrifice between himself and God. But it was a fact that the karma that he was working out was not his own. So he himself did not feel that he could ask for a termination of the tapasya that he was doing. Divine Mother had inflicted upon him this opportunity to let some heavy karma run through his body, which would manifest as pain and discomfort. And he was not going to initiate the end of that cycle. And he stood strong and insisted, but when Devi felt her own inspiration, regardless of Swami's, Swami accepted that as gracefully as he had accepted what Divine Mother sent him. Now, on the question of whether just anybody can use their body to work out karma for others. Sometimes I hear people speak of that as if it were a very casual thing. Here's something very interesting about that point. When Master talks about the healing potential of the mind and the kind of energies that we can bring to bear to heal ourselves and to reform ourselves. Yesterday, I believe I mentioned that Master said, with your willpower, you can regenerate a severed limb. So there was really no limit to what Master thought the power of the mind could accomplish. But on the issue of taking karma for others, Master says only advanced yogis can do it by a secret technique. He does not recommend it. He does not tell us that we can all do it. He doesn't even really explain what advanced yogis are doing. And I mentioned casually, but the issue that I had with Swamiji about him taking karma onto his body was also a factor of the book, Swami Kriyananda's We Have Known Him. I wrote that book in America, but then when I was close to the end, not finished, but close to the end, Swami invited me to come over to India, where he was living, and I spent about 3 weeks there and basically finished that book in his house. He had put accommodations for Jyotish and Devi on the flat roof of the house. He'd put up a sort of a spacious tent and furnished it like a room, and it was an extra bedroom in his house. And when Jyotish and Devi were in India, they would live there with Swami in that room, and Swami invited me to use it because they weren't there. They were in America at that time. So I sat next to Swamiji, and he read. He'd not read any of the manuscript, and we sat side by side, and he read every page of the manuscript. And I had taken a lot of liberties, intuitive liberties, because I knew Swamiji would read the book, and therefore any errors that I'd make would be corrected before it was published. And there were almost no corrections to that book, which was a confirmation of my intuitive understanding of Swami's motivation and the meaning of some of the things he did. I had remembered one incident wrong, and Swami corrected it. He knew I was wrong because I had attributed an attitude to him that he knew he would never have, which is I had had him telling God how to solve a problem, and he told me he would never do that. He would only tell God that there was a problem, but he wouldn't dictate to the divine. And I had misremembered, and that was a very important mistake, and oddly the only one I made, because it illustrated a principle that I've never lost track of since. But I had also said that when he fell in the bathroom and cracked his back on the lip of the shower, and it caused him intense pain for a very long time. Swami said he did it. Well, the ways he put it was, I prayed to Divine Mother to do something about a tough situation they were facing in Italy. Then I fell in the bathroom, and I hope it helps. In other words, he was telling me that he was taking the karma onto his body. So I said that. And he said, he told me that I couldn't say it. I said, but you did say it. We had this argument. Amazingly, I was arguing with him. But you did say it. It's the whole point of the story. It doesn't make any sense unless I say it. He says, I don't want you to say it. But of course I should say it. I just was like that. The next morning, I woke up knowing how to fix the story. I woke up about 4:30, and by 5 o'clock, I was sitting up and I was rewriting it. And when Swami came into my room to say, you're not going to say that. And I said, it's all right. I've rewritten it. I figured it out. And he said, I said again, it's true, though. He said, yes, but it's not for me to say. That's how he put it. He said, even if I did say it, it's not for me to say. Oh, okay, I understand that. But now that he's passed, I feel that I can. But I really want to make the point extremely clear that using your body to take on the karma of other people is not something, it's not so easy to do. And even in the doing of it, there are other aspects. You have to know it's the right thing to do. The desire to do it is one thing. How many parents have pleaded with God to give the illness to them instead of to their child? And how rarely, if ever, is that prayer fulfilled? Because even the people we love, part of the way we have to love them is to let them have their own destiny. I certainly, in my relationships with people, I've never born children. But in my relationships with people, I find that's one of the hardest things to do. We become panicked about their destiny and just desperately want to direct other people's destiny. When I was talking about couples yesterday, because the last paragraph of Home Life is couples maintaining a certain divine respect for each other, because one of the many things that happens when we live closely with other people is that we begin to feel responsible for their destiny, and we begin to have an almost overwhelming need to direct their destiny. And all of these are the result of loving people, but they are also the result of loving the humanity more than the divinity, and letting our attachment for the humanity interfere with our faith in God, and even with our faith in each other. I learned this very intently in the last years of my parents' life. My parents lived into their mid-80s. My mother struggled with Parkinson's for the last 15 years of her life. My father, in the last few years, became mentally diminished. He was physically fine, but the very end of my mother's life, his mental state just suddenly deteriorated. I don't think it was Alzheimer's, because it sort of happened all at once and then didn't actually progress. There must have been some incident that was never medically recorded, but nonetheless, there it was. So their lives became complicated, and they were less able to make good decisions, and I became involved in trying to facilitate their lives, which to me meant to organize it according to my own lights, to mold them to a certain extent to my convenience. And it became the illustration of something that had been going on my whole life, but I had never quite cognized it. I have a lot of willpower, I have a lot of creativity, I have a lot of energy, and I really care about people. So I could often, when people were facing difficult situations, I could do things that would help make their life work better. Most of the time, those things that I would try to do were appreciated, but not always by any means. And it wasn't merely the help I was offering, but I realized when it became my parents that my motivation was generous, yes, but I was also highly motivated by fear. And the fear was that if I didn't help, people wouldn't be able to cope with their own lives. And I also projected on my parents, I projected onto them how I would feel if I were in their position. Except it crossed my mind, finally, that the life that they lived was exceedingly different than the life that I lived. And the position that they were in at the end of their life was exactly what it should be for them to work out their karma. It wasn't my karma. That's why I was sort of panicked about it. It all seemed somehow wrong. But it didn't seem wrong to them, because they had gotten there step by step, year by year, decision by decision, and it was the inevitable result of the karmic trajectory they were on, and it was exactly perfect for them. Now here's the last piece that I'd figured out, which is I don't relish having challenging situations. I'm not a person who praise for challenge after challenge. I don't mind a little ease and pleasure. I'm a little timid in that respect, less so than I used to be, but still, fundamentally, I was not afraid of my karma. Whatever it was, I trusted God. But I realized that I was afraid for everybody else. It's like, I can cope with my karma, but you certainly can't cope with yours unless I come in and rescue you. And I realized it was that underlying tone of disrespect that polluted even the generous actions. Because it was, I need to help you because you can't cope. I'm the only one who can cope. Think about that. I mean, yes, it was generously inspired, but something was a little off. And I realized with my parents, there was a lot that was off. I just didn't trust God and I didn't trust them. It's just like, I'm the only one who knows. So I changed my tune. And with my parents, I tried to ask them, how would you like to solve this problem? How would you like to deal with this? What is consistent with your flow of energy rather than my managing your life for my convenience? And all of a sudden we started getting along beautifully. And I was able to really help them work out their destiny. But first I had to stop being afraid. Everything, at least in my life, tends to come down to that kind of fear. So now we come to where I was talking, which is the desire to take the karma for other people. Is it really helping them to spare them the opportunity to grow in the way their own destiny dictates? Is it really helping them to be afraid that they're not going to be able to rise to the occasion? Who are we serving? We're naturally serving our own vicarious suffering and many other aspects. But all of these moments are opportunities for us to really learn and to go much deeper. So even the desire, let me take your karma. See, a master can do that because he knows exactly what we need. He does, and a master can do that because he's not afraid of letting us have our own destiny. And he's not uncomfortable by letting us act out our own destiny. He's not inconvenienced by our suffering. He doesn't want us to suffer. He wants us to learn. But if suffering is necessary, he's not afraid to take us there. I've had that thought really often in my own mind. I've repeated it many times. If Divine Mother could take me to freedom by any other route, she would take me by that route. So if this is the route that she's leading me, if this is the path where she's leading me, it must be the quickest way home, or else we wouldn't go this way. So this applies to everything I was saying yesterday about taking care of the body, and it really applies to that last section about when we live really closely with people. We have to always respect the divine journey that they're on. And no matter how closely allied our karma becomes, it never actually merges into one. We're always standing as independent entities. One of the things that really got me on the spiritual path when I was 18 or so, I visualized the day of my death. Now I have that much more vividly because I've been present with a number of people when they've died, so I feel it more real, but I felt it pretty strongly then. And I visualize myself, having close friends or lifelong relationships. And so at my deathbed, I'm not alone. But I knew that there would be a point when I would be absolutely alone. Even if there were people physically pressing up against me, loving me, holding me, there would still be that moment in consciousness when I would be absolutely alone. And the only reality, I didn't have the right words, but the only reality would be destiny and me. Would I be ready for that? Who would I be? And there was no escaping it. And at the age of 18, It pushed me powerfully to dedicate my life to spiritual practice. But you see, that's true for everyone. That solitude that is mine is yours and everyone's. And we can help each other to an extraordinary degree, especially if we remember and respect that. So, my friends, God bless you.